morning, CPAC. We're so happy to be with you this morning. We appreciate you being here so bright and early. And of course, Andrew starts getting the room going, throwing things, but we love him, so we give him that extra leeway. So I'm actually super honored to be here with 3 international leaders. We have Jay, who is Mr. CPAC Japan. I'll just refer to you in that as that. Miklos, who is co-founder of CPAC Hungary, or founder. And we have Andrew, who is with and founded and brought CPAC to Australia. So we have a lot to talk about in terms of, thank you, it goes to them. I want to start with you, Miklos, because Hungary is the only country that has survived, shall we say, and thrived since communism. And you ratified your constitution in 2012, so that's really quite recently. And it's the Constitution, I read it, it's very interesting. I encourage everyone to read it because it's quite specific, and it's very interesting to see what you all chose to include in your Constitution. But you started, initially there was basic stipulations, and one of them that really caught my eye is only 8 words. And it says, the source of all power are the people. That really says a lot. It captures the sentiment of your country. So speak to, if you would, why it was important for you to be the leader and the pioneer of conservatism in Hungary and bringing CPAC to Hungary.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here for the 4th time, I think, at CPAC. To tell the truth, I knew that I wouldn't be allowed to say this in front of an American crowd, but if it comes to conservatism, if it comes to conservative renaissance in Europe, Hungary is the shining city on the hill. Thank you. And because the fundamental law, our constitution, it protects the Judeo-Christian heritage of our civilization and the Christian heritage of our country. It protects the national identity and state sovereignty. And last but not least, it protects the family and the children's rights to their identity at sex at birth. So those are the very, God, home and family are the very important issues for us Hungarians. And we in Hungary, or at least me myself, I do have a dream. And my dream is the liberals, progressives' nightmare, is the strong international cooperation of national conservative forces. And the flagship project for this in my country is CPAC Hungary, because it's a symbol that we on the right, at the international level, we can join forces and we can unite. And that's the most important thing nowadays, I think.
So, Jay, you started a conversation with Matt, and I think perhaps Dan Schneider at the time, about bringing CPAC to Japan. And you then brought it for the first time, I believe in 2017, and there's been a CPAC in Japan ever since. So speak to what made you be the, shall we say, pioneer in Japan for bringing CPAC there.
Okay. 今、ミクロスも話したけれども、とにかくリベラル、それから共産主義、そしてグローバリズム、これが連携するスピードは非常に速いんだけれども、保守はどうしてもそれぞれの国だけで孤立しながら戦っている。これが非常に弱い状況だと感じました。例えば、つい最近、アメリカでも大陸を横断する中国の気球がありましたよね、ここまで。
First off, so as Miklos was just saying, the liberals, the communists, the globalists, they're very, very good at uniting internationally. They're very, very good at fighting on an international level, whereas we conservatives, until recently, have not been so good on that. We've been more focused on our own countries rather than being focused on cooperation between sovereign nations.
でも、ああいう状況、気球が平気で自分の国を通過するような状況というのを、日本はもう10年以上前から経験してたわけですね。 でこの中国の覇権みたいなものは必ずアメリカにも影響を及ぼすと考えました。だから私はさっきジュリーが言ってくれたように、当時まだ議長に就任したばかりのマット・シュラップとかダンと話をして、世界にしっかりと連携したコンサバティズムを広げようよというふうに提案して、彼がマットが受け入れてくれたこと、これが一番大きな決定的な要因でした。ただ言い出しっぺが私だったので、じゃあまず CPAC は最初日本からやれよと言われて、よしと、それで開催したわけです。
And our friends in America, you just had a little balloon from China fly over your country. And we've had that in Japan for decades now. Nobody stood up to them. So when I came to Matt Schlapp 7 years ago, I said I thought that this threat that China was posing to Japan, that they would pose the same threat to the US, and that this was something we could unite over.
No, you're absolutely right, and that little balloon was not so little after all. And I want to speak a little bit more to what it's like being in your neighborhood. But first, let's go to the guy who's the troublemaker with the hats. You co-founded CPAC Australia. Speak to that. Why was it important for you to be the pioneer, if you will, in your country?
We had our first CPAC in 2019, and I felt that the country was going in a direction. It was becoming very woke. There was a cancel culture emerging. Essentially, we're following the lead of the American left. Our lefties are very simple people. They just follow what happens here in the United States. And so CPAC, I envisage that as being a platform to strengthen the conservative movement. There's no great gathering point in Australia for conservatives to meet and discuss ideas and plan and have fun. And so in 2019, with the first CPAC, what I didn't realise is how powerful that brand is and how much it worries the left. We had protests in the street. Antifa protested and shut down the Sydney CBD, protesting our opening of our conference. We had the now Prime Minister, who was the opposition leader then, debating whether CPAC should be allowed to proceed in the Parliament of Australia. We hadn't even had our first CPAC. So I realised then that partnering with CPAC or cooperating and collaborating with CPAC was definitely the right vehicle. And then COVID hit. And I don't know, did anyone see what happened in Australia with COVID? We went from you guys thinking we were Crocodile Dundee to a bunch of old people hiding under our beds. Look, what you saw was extreme. It was a bit of fake news there, but there was definitely one state that did lock citizens in their houses for 6 months. And it's appalling to think that Aussies let that happen. And it just reinforced my view that the Conservatives need strengthening. We had a Conservative Prime Minister through that period, and he let the Conservative movement down. He's gone now. He deserved to lose.
So each of these gentlemen, by just what you said now, so illustrates the need for there to be this strong cooperation amongst our countries, and how CPAC really is sort of the common thread, if you will, the arsenal in fighting this fight. I mean, you just said something that is absolutely stunning that I hope people heard, which is you had the Parliament debating whether a private entity could have a conference in its country. I mean, imagine that. That's tyrannical. It's crazy. So again, thank you for all of your leadership. Jay, I want to go back to you for a minute, because you mentioned China before. You certainly live in a little bit of a dangerous neighborhood, shall we say. Japan, as everybody knows, is an island. You're less than 2,000 miles away from China. I'd like you to speak a little bit more to that. And in particular, I think a great way to illustrate, if you will, the danger of your neighborhood is to tell everybody what happened in 2019 when you had invited Andy Chan, who is a Hong Kong pro-liberty activist, to come to Japan and speak. This really illustrates what Japan is up against, and now it's far worse.
Okay. 今ジュリーが言ったように2019年ちょうどご存知の方もいると思うんですけど、3月頃から香港では民主化のデモが本格化してきました。日本もそれから香港も非常に中国のプレッシャーを感じ、そして台湾もですね、軍事的経済的圧力を受けている中、CPAC ジャパンを2019年の8月日本で3回目ですねやろうとしていました。続きあります。
So thank you, Julie. As you all know, probably, in 2019, around March, we started having protests in Hong Kong against the extradition bill. And this was something that affects Japan, the US, and Taiwan because we feel the threat that China emits. And we were actually having CPAC Japan in 2019, right in August of that year.
そうした時に日本はありがたいことにもうしっかり CPAC できる環境にあったんですけど、香港からもし自由主義の運動が呼ぼうとすると非常にさまざまな抵抗を北京の意向を受けた香港の政府から彼らは圧力を受けていたんですね。
And we tried to get a freedom fighter, Andy Chan, over from Hong Kong. And unfortunately, we were able to have CPAC in Japan. We didn't have our parliament debating it. But the Chinese regime in Beijing stopped him from coming to Japan to speak.
で、いよいよ彼が登壇する前の日、香港の空港から日本に来ようとしたら彼は逮捕されてしまって、で、彼女の恋人だけが命からがら日本にやってきて、マットとか私とか、そして当時来ていたアメリカの議員たちに涙ながらに訴えて香港を救ってほしいとこう言われたわけです。
And the day before he was supposed to speak, the CCP arrested him at the airport on his way to board the plane. His partner was able to make it to Japan, though, and she spoke to me, to Matt and Dan from CPAC, and Andrew as well, about the danger that Hong Kong was facing and asked us to help save Hong Kong.
その要請を受けて僕らはマットとダンとあとアンドリューも一緒に行ったね。で香港に行って活動家のあっちで非常に有名なジャーナリストだったジミー・ライの邸宅にも招かれたりして、状況を聞いて、そして実際のもう銃が飛び交う中のプロテストの運動もこの目で見てきました。
And we visited me, Matt Schlapp, Dan, and Andrew. We visited Jimmy Lai from the Apple Daily over in Hong Kong. We stood with the protesters. We saw what was going on before our very eyes.
そしてジミー・ライの家に招かれて、食事をして、で我々出ようとしたらですね、もう覆面の男たちのバイクが火炎瓶を投げつけてきて、ジミー・ライの邸宅ガレージ中心にも火事になったんですね。そこ命からがら逃げてくるというようなそんな状況が香港の中国のプレッシャーとして受けていたのを我々肌で感じたわけです。
And so we went to Jimmy Lai's house and had dinner with him. And just us being there triggered the CCP so much that very night they firebombed his mansion to try to silence him. And this is the state, this is what China's threat really means, and this is what we saw in Hong Kong. This is the perfect illustration of what China is doing.
これがアジアの現状です。
This is what Asia is facing right now.
And where is Jimmy Lai now?
今、ジミー・ライは
逮捕されて北京でどうなっているかわからない状況です。
Well, so he's in prison right now. We don't quite know if he's safe or what's going on.
So think about that. They travel to Hungary, to Hong Kong in support of Andy. They go to Jimmy's house for a meeting. And thank goodness, look what happened to Jimmy. No sooner do they leave that Jimmy's home is firebombed and this man's in prison, all because they want to sit and they want to talk about conservatism and liberty. So this is what we're facing. This is what the freedom fighters of the world are facing. We really need to take this incredibly seriously. So did you want to say something?
I just wanted to add something there. I accompanied Jay and Matt and Dan, and there was a couple of others. One of the most inspiring things I saw, and also illustrates why this organisation and what I think around the globe, what we can potentially achieve, is Matt and Dan and myself, Jay, we went to a protest. It's pouring rain. The police have got the tear gas guns out. They're from here to the barrier they're away from us. And it was raining, and Matt and Dan put their CPAC umbrellas up, and the students rallied. Like we're in Hong Kong, and they recognised the CPAC umbrellas and rallied around Matt and Dan. They knew what CPAC meant. They started cheering, and they knew that the Americans were standing with them. It was very inspiring.
And I think that's crucial, right? When America stands with those who seek freedom and liberty, it's such an important and powerful force. And CPAC is the means, is the voice to have this happen. It's really a uniting force. So Miklos, you're in Europe. You're the sole pioneer, if you will, again, on that continent. You're going to be bringing CPAC again this May, I believe.
Exactly.
What are the prospects of getting your neighbors to join the fight?
Look, Hungary lived more than 40 years under communist oppression. So if there is a country knowing very well how to live and how to survive dictatorship, that is Hungary. And of course, you know, when I see this whole cancel culture, political correctness, CRT, Vogue, what do you have here, ESG, and other Vogue things, those remind me of communist mechanisms. They did have the very same goal to silence people, to seize the freedom of speech, to seize the freedom of religion. And, but we survived communism, and we will survive this aggressive propaganda of the open society led by George Soros as well. And Hungary, in that sense, can play a very crucial role. It can be the powerhouse of the conservative renaissance, and we can bring our neighbors, our conservatives allies to the board in the continent, and I do hope so that from here, from the US as well, because of course Hungary is a very good example of laboratory, how to bring conservative ideas into practice. I mean, if it comes to family policies, if it comes to border protection, if it comes to the protection of the children, those are not just slogans or PR activities in Hungary, but those conservative policies have been put into practice in my country. But of course, on the other hand, we do have very crucial issues at our hands to stop the open society, to stop the deep state. Because you have your deep state here in DC, we do have our own deep state in Brussels, in the European Union, and we are trying to fight for the state sovereignty. That is, we are fighting for. And of course, what we face nowadays in Hungary, that's the gender ideology and this whole LGBTQA+ stuff focusing on the minors. They already began in Hungary to go into schools, to go into kindergartens, and the Hungarian parliament adopted an act on the protection of the children, and there was a referendum where... I tell you a figure. There was a referendum last year on the protection of the children and against gender ideology, and 97 or 95% of the people voted against gender ideology and voted for the protection of the children.
It's amazing.
So
yeah,
we should, my only point is that we should have our positive messages, and we should show, we as conservatives internationally, that we are for God, for homeland, and for the family. But on the other hand, we should not forget how to protect ourselves and defend ourselves, and how to fight the fight against the very negative progressive liberal tide that we are facing all in our respective countries, because they do the same. They do the same here in the US, in Brazil, in Europe. That's what we call the tactic of silent rain. Maybe the very tools differ, but as they attack the foundations of our civilization, and now as they attack the minors, the children, that's the very same thing all over the Western world, and we should step up together against those propaganda.
So, what you said, everybody in this room can relate to the gender ideology where on any given day there could be 5 or 45 different genders, right? We all know this, we see this, our children are being indoctrinated in the schools in the States. You mentioned CRT, I mean it goes on, and the tentacles of George Soros, people think about it that he's just focused on the United States. He's focused on the entire world, people, and this is frightening. We all know what Ronald Reagan said, right? Freedom is only one generation from extinction. We all have to fight this fight day in and day out because the left doesn't stop. Their feet are always on that gas pedal and they are pushing forward.
Just one last sentence, sorry. Their fight for sensitization and liberating people will not stop. Now, a few decades ago, they did have the sexual revolution. Now they do have this gender propaganda. And the next thing, I tell you, will be pedophilia and polyamoria. So there is no stop. There is no stop, I assure you.
There is no stopping them. So we don't have that much time left. Jay, you have the same experience. What is it like in Japan from the perspective of these woke ideologies?
日本もキャンセルカルチャーもそう、それから LGBT ももういよいよ法案でもう決まりそうな勢いになっていて、本当にこれと戦わなきゃいけない。で、日本にとっては保守の砦であった安倍さんという有名なね、皆さんもご存知の総理大臣も去年暗殺されたわけです。でも我々がずっと続けて日本でも CPAC を一緒にやっているおかげでですね、新しい保守のリーダーも続々と誕生している。まあ、本当にこうせめぎ合いながら戦っていますけれども、日本でも確実に新しい芽がですね、始まっていると、そんな感じです。
Yeah, so in Japan, we certainly face similar things. Cancel culture, this radical gender ideology. There's passing bills, trying to pass bills regarding that right now as we speak, and we certainly need to fight this. But to speak on Japan, Prime Minister Abe was a very big conservative leader over in our country, and he was assassinated, as you probably know, and that was a huge blow to Japanese conservatism. But on the bright side, over in Japan, I think because of CPAC Japan, we're raising up new conservative leaders to take his place. So there is a bright future, though we're still in the fight.
I agree, and that was a terrible loss when he was assassinated. You, my sir, what have you to say for all of this that's going on in the world?
Cancel culture's rife. Wokeism and cancel culture's rife in Australia. Our last conference in October, 4 weeks before we were to open the doors, we got cancelled from our venue because they worked out they didn't want CPAC there. We had a contract. We have legal remedies available to us, but they don't care. They just cancelled. And of course, the protesters turn up every time we have a conference, and they harass our attendees. The police turn up en masse, and they have these swarming fights through the streets of Sydney. There was a Marxism conference the week before ours. It was inconceivable that conservatives would go down the road and protest that conference, which is probably what we should be doing. But we're polite. And maybe we need to be less polite.
No, we need to fight the fight. We need to fight the fight. Yeah. I just want to say one last thing. Thank you, CPAC. Thank you, CPAC, for enabling these gentlemen to fight the fight in their country. You're warriors, and we are really grateful for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.